Today we're here to talk about Rosenior, the current coach of Chelsea, and I'm here to talk about today why I feel like Rosenior should be given the credit, but also the time he deserves to fully build the project he deserves to at Chelsea. To do this, I am going to be going through his previous clubs, which are Derby County, Hull City and Strasbourg FC, leading on to Chelsea. And I'm going to be using videos, screenshots of information and cutbacks to my face to try and build the most objective arguments possible as to why I think this should be the case. Which, out of all these clubs, I think the most likened to Chelsea was surprisingly Strasbourg, but I would recommend watching every section to build a full picture. I hope you enjoyed the video. And to kick things off, Rosenior's first coaching and interim manager role was at Derby County FC. Now, this was a very difficult time for the club of Derby County. They had entered administration, they had been deducted points, they could not sign players for any type of fee, and the points deduction indicates quite a serious administration, because in the past, there have been clubs who have been banned from transfers in recent history, like Hull City, Reading, who have not actually been deducted points. Here is the timeline leading up to Rosenior's appointment. But before Rosenior was head coach, he was the assistant manager to England legend Wayne Rooney. And Derby County actually did quite well with these appointments. They obviously did not get relegated into League Two, and although it was a tough time for the club, the pairing of these two coaches and managers were able to stabilise Derby County until the season after this, recording a 34% approximate win rate. But as the title suggests, we're not here to talk about Wayne Rooney and Rosenior. We're here to talk about Rosenior. So the focus will be on Rosenior's time as the interim coach of Derby County, where he was able to actually make signings and really have control. And here are the signings Rosenior was able to make under restrictions that he couldn't pay clubs fees for any players, but it was an improvement over last season because he was able to sign players, just obviously for a transfer fee of zero. The key players include Lang, include McGoldrick, and include Lewis Dobbin, and we'll get into why that is. At the same time, not only was Rosenior able to sign a lot of players, but he was also able to extend key contracts, like experienced centre-back Curtis Davies, Erin Cashin, who is obviously doing well in the Championship right now, Forsyth, who had a lot of experience, and Thompson. Now, it is unfortunate in terms of Rosenior at Derby County, and that's because he didn't actually have a lot of games as the interim coach. But as the record shows, he did really well, even better than when paired with Wayne Rooney. Statistically, of course, I'm not here to slander Wayne Rooney. But what this shows, in my opinion, is Rosenior was able to make the best out of what he had, and especially the restrictions he had, even in his first ever proper coaching role, which would foreshadow, so to speak, what he could do with better teams under less strenuous circumstances. And I mean that as no disrespect to the club of Derby County. They're actually doing really well in the Championship right now, and I think the club has Wayne Rooney and Rosenior to partially thanked for that, for helping to stabilise the club as a whole. What ended up happening was a change of ownership at Derby County, and Liam Rosenior was replaced with Paul Wen as soon as that ownership change happened. Now, I wouldn't say that this is a reflection on Rosenior. This is actually quite common when an owner changes. For example, at a club like Hull City, Grant McCann was immediately replaced with Shotarad Vladze. But this isn't the end of the Derby County section. Let's have a look at some of the key signings and what they went on to do after at Derby County. Let's start off with Mendes Lang and David McGoldrick. Both of these players did well for Derby County, and both of these players are now doing really well at other clubs, respectively, which are Barnsley, who are run in League One. McGoldrick has been quite prolific for Barnsley, as well as Lang, who signed for MK Dons and recorded over 10 goal contributions in 21 appearances, and was voted the fans' League 2 Player of the Month. Now, this is in the league below, but let's bear in mind he signed to Derby County for a transfer fee of zero. In my opinion, this is a clear early sign that Liam Rosenior has a good eye for a transfer, even when he doesn't necessarily have the right budget to pull off, let's say, the ideal and perfect transfer. As well as this, for a bit of football trivia, I also think it's interesting and also kind of funny how McGoldrick ended up signing to a Barnsley team who was coached by one of his team mates under Derby County, signed by Rosenior, who was Connor Horahan. However, the signing that really proves Rosenior's key eye for a good transfer is Lewis Dobbin, who ended up signing to Aston Villa for a fee of £10 million. He went on loan to West Brom and is currently doing really well at Preston this current season, with 11 goal contributions in 25 appearances. He's started most games this current campaign, and let it be a reminder, he was signed a couple of years ago to Derby County from Rosenior for a fee of £0 This will foreshadow, one, the kind of eye Rosenior has for a transfer, but two, the kind of pull he has as an exciting young coach for exciting young up and coming prospect players. Now, here's what Rosenior's ex-team mate and player under him, Curtis Davis, would go on to say about Rosenior's time as Wayne Rooney's assistant manager. Whether this is true, it's of course debatable, but in another sense, I think, why would Curtis Davis lie about such a thing? He was literally in that dressing room, and I find it quite an interesting quote and phrase. But in the end, you either believe him or you think he's some kind of Jay Cartwright from In-Betweeners, and I don't really see a middle ground in between this source, personally. But with that said, here's what Wayne Rooney had to say about his time working with Liam Rosenior, with him as his assistant manager.
Liam is as good a coach, and I'm being truthful on this, I've ever worked with. He's more than capable of going into Chelsea and doing a great job.
And this leads us on to the next club, Hull City. Now, this was the club where Rosenior would have his full first season as a head coach, and this is also the club I support, so I have a lot of insight into Rosenior's time at Hull City, whilst still remaining as objective as I possibly can. We're going to go over Liam Rosenior's time at Hull, his pull to sign young fresh talent, as we talked about in the Derby County section, but also what led to his sacking and narratives around his sacking, even from sides of Hull City fans. So with that in mind, Hull started off the 2022 to 23 season with Shota Arveladze as head coach. Now this didn't last very long because the tactics, the goal difference, which was only worse by the team who finished bottom under Colo Torre, Wigan. This was not a good first opening half to a season for new owner Akun Ilajali, and this is what essentially led to Shota's sacking and also Liam Rosenior's appointment mid-season. On a sad note, these were the players who were brought in the summer of that season. I think it's important to note players like Saeed Manesh, Dokagang Hasinik and Hassala Emhand and Harvey Bill were signings that didn't quite work out. Saeed and Hasinik because of constant injuries. Harvey Bill didn't quite perform to expectations, and a lot of these signings from our new Turkish owner were from the Turkish league. I think it's important to note also that Hassala Emhand did not play a single game this entire campaign. Rosenior came in and made the following signings in the January window that same season. These were some good signings, including Connolly, who was a good option, especially in a relegation battle. Carl Hadalo, who obviously ended up signing for Leeds and actually plays for Leeds in the Premier League, as well as promising young signings like Harry Vaughan and Xavi Simons, who ended up signing on a permanent. However, I feel like it should be stated, I feel like Rosenior would have had more say in those sort of signings, just judging from the players that came, than Shota Arveladze had. But Rosenior still had to obviously inherit most of that team. Despite this, Rosenior ended up finishing 15th from 20th with Hull City in that time period. It's also important to note he took Hull City in half a season from, as I've said, the worst goal difference in the league by Wigan, who finished bottom and got relegated by the season's end into one of the best defensive records in the division that season, bar the teams who actually got promoted and were up for promotion. And to top it off, here's the comparison in that half a season between Shota and Rosenior. Rosenior obviously made the goals against a lot lower. He conceded less. He got more clean sheets in less games with a lot less defeats. There were a lot of draws in this half a season, but like I said, he didn't exactly inherit a stable championship team. We made 14 signings, 14 plus signings off the back of the sale of Keane Lewis Potter, and it was Rosenior's job to make a couple of stabilisation signings in January and practically keep us up to build off of next season. In the summer of next season, these are the players Rosenior managed to bring in. Now, just by looking at it, I would say this was a better window. It was a better window for a championship side, and there weren't as many risky signings. And I say that trying to be as objective as possible. The main good signings were Jadon Philogene from Aston Villa for 4-5 million. We'll get onto that later. Liam Delap as a loan from Manchester City after spending the last season on loan at Stoke and Preston respectively. Tyler Morton, who played most of the season at Blackburn last season and did pretty well in terms of how much he appeared for a young loan signing. But on the other hand, I will say, even though Vinagre of Wolves and Sporting, which is where he came from, and Scott Twan from the Burnley team under Company, which practically stomped the division that season, those were signings which didn't quite work out. But what I will say is they were good signings in concept. And here is the list of departures that summer. What I'd say is nearly all of these departures were good. A lot of loans out for the young players. Benjamin Tete, Figueiredo. Tete had injury issues. Figueiredo didn't quite gel with the team. I'd say the one player which shouldn't have been let go, however, was Oscar Estepinian, and this will become relevant later. Delap started well for Hull City. Here are his stats overall for that season. However, he got injured in early January, and this became a problem because we let Oscar go, a striker who scored over 10 goals in the league, and we were meant to properly replace him. We were confident of signing ex-Watford striker Keenan Davis, who did well in Watford's promotion push. We were so confident in that we didn't really have a plan B in case Keenan Davis didn't end up signing. What ended up happening was he ended up going to Udinese, the Serie A club. And what happened was we tried to target other strikers. One of them was Tom Cannon, and then we tried a late push for David Datro Fofana from Chelsea on deadline day. Neither of these worked out, so we ended up letting go our top scoring striker last season without properly replacing him, leaving us with Liam Delap and Aaron Connolly, which would come back to bite us in January when Delap got injured. We signed Ryan Alsop as our keeper that summer, but this wasn't Liam Rosenior's first choice. If Rosenior had his way, we would have been starting Carl Darlow again that season. But what happened was there were reports from sources like Hull Live that Newcastle wanted 5 million for Darlow, which was said we couldn't exactly afford. Now that's understandable, but what actually ended up happening was Leeds ended up signing him for 500,000 that same season, and he wasn't even their first choice keeper. What happened there? It's debatable. We'd spent a lot of money on Philogene amongst other players like Delap with the wages, but loans, I can't imagine Hull City were paying the full amount for the wages, but this is absolutely debatable. I don't think anyone can say who didn't have an eye or a hand in the club at that time can say the real reason why this transfer never happened. My best assumption would be wages. As well as this, Rosenior was pursuing Derby County's defensive midfielder Matt Baird, which never happened in the end. And again, these points in isolation might seem irrelevant or pointless. However, they do come into play later on with certain narratives around the sacking of Liam Rosenior and why that is and what actually happened. By January, Hull City looked in good stead to push for the playoffs. We were 7th, just 1 point off Sunderland in 6th place. We'd had a good half a season. Philogene was performing very well. His dribbling looked amazing. Delap's aggressive approach to striking and pressing in possession was working well, and for the first time in a long time at that point, Hull City fans had something to be excited about rather than worrying all season whether we'd make up enough points to beat the drop or even beyond that start to begin to build good foundations to eventually start to push anywhere near to where we ended up by January that season. Hull City made quite a big push in the January window of this season. Carvalho got recalled from a Bundesliga side he was on loan at, so we loaned him. Anas Zauri, again from the company team, which smashed the league in that season. Ryan Giles on loan from Luton Town, who was very good at Middlesbrough, linking up with Chuba Akpom. Noah Ohio, who actually turned out to be a decent striker. I think there was potential that we could have taken him beyond this half a season, which never happened. Hamo from Trabzonspor, Ivan Pandor from Fortuna Sittard in Belgium, and Billy Sharp, a very experienced Championship striker, obviously known for his days at Sheffield United. These looked like very good signings, and we'll talk about how they all performed. The player that did the most out of these signings was Fabio Carvalho. 9 goals in 20 games in half a season is not bad at all. It's actually really good. However, the caveat to this being we had to end up playing him as a lone striker on his own, when obviously he's known for being an attacking midfielder, which would have been great had we had a striker of similar quality to support his talents from attacking midfield. Now, why is this? We'll get into that right now. This was, of course, unfortunately, because Billy Sharp did not perform to expectations. He didn't suit possession play, which is ironically enough the said reason for getting rid of Oscar in the first place, scoring 0 goals in the league, restricting most of his game time to bench appearances, and this is why we had to push Carvalho up to a lone striker, which, in my personal opinion, while of course staying as objective as possible, could have hindered our attacking creativity in the midfield, especially in a style of play like possession. And with all that in mind, here's where Hull City finished, coming down to the last day of the campaign, where they narrowly missed out on the playoffs. But considering we finished 15th last season, this was overall viewed as a good season for us, generally anyhow, despite the fact we had made a lot of ambitious signings, which is of course undeniable, and this is important to the eventual sacking of Liam Rosenior, which we are going to go over in detail right now.
A shocking bit of news has just been reportedly announced. It's not officially confirmed yet, but it seems that it's going to be. Hull City apparently sacked Liam Rosenior. Yes, Liam Rosenior, who signed a brand new 3-year deal in December, was shortlisted for manager of the season and managed to get a Hull City squad into 7th place, being the last game of the season was the only deciding factor where we didn't get playoffs. And for some reason, Adrian Ojali and his team have cut connections with Liam Rosenior. This has been reported from Sky Sports, all of the top news stories. Hull City have not confirmed it themselves, but it seems like it will be coming that way.
And this is the point which unfortunately is a very divisive, because Liam Rosenior was sacked after this finish, and some fans didn't mind it, where other fans like myself were kind of shocked and also, quite frankly, very unhappy with this sacking. There were rumours swirling around that the owner, Okun, and Rosenior had some kind of agreement where if Okun gave Liam Rosenior what he wanted in the windows, Rosenior had to finish in the top six, which is the playoffs in the championships. However, this claim is fully unsubstantiated, and I've also heard things like Rosenior had a super team, and Rosenior spent all the money, and his football was boring, and things like this. And this is the point where my impartiality and objectivity must be broke a bit, because personally I think categorically these things are not true. First of all, if Rosenior was backed to the hill, like some fans claim he was, we wouldn't have been starting Allsop. We'd have been starting Carl Hidalgo. We would have had a proper replacement for Oscar, which never happened until January, and even then the replacement in January, where teams kind of have to pick the best of the bunch, because every main striker clubs are fighting over generally go away in the summer, which was a risk and a gamble, and it didn't work out. Unfortunately, it could have in concept, and it wasn't a bad swoop to go and get Billy Sharp, but again, it didn't work out. We would have had Max Baird. We probably don't make signings like Jason Lakilo and Ömer from the Turkish league, and from the, I can't even remember what league Lakilo came from. That's the quality of league we're talking about, and I'm going to go through all of these points individually, but where we are going to start off with is the real reason Rosenior was sacked. There's an interview I've put in this video from Rosenior talking about longevity and building up a team for next season. You know, a sort of process which would have built up to put us in a stronger position into next season. And then after that, I've got an interview with Akun Ilajali saying exactly the opposite. And now, what I'd also like to preface these clips and these topics with is that Akun wanted an exciting style of football, a very attacking style of football, which we'll also get into. But that was never ever Rosenior's style of play. Rosenior was always about control and setting up solidly from the back and patience. All of these things, which, quite frankly, in hindsight, makes me question why he was hired in the first place. But let's stop yapping and let's get into the specifics.
Alfie and Maka have been outstanding for us. They've all deserved it. Regan getting his new deal. I want to build something, as well as David Robson, a younger goalkeeper, and hopefully a couple more to come that I can't speak about now. So we're trying to build something. We're trying to build a platform. It might not be as exciting in June or in May at the end of the season, but I want us to be excited at the start of May next season.
How to make this team go to higher stages with the fans, and how we can improve the team and go to better and better successes, let's say. But in football, of course, most important thing is, to just be united in everything so that the success can come more and more. So when you have a difference of thinking from the coach side and the ownership and the football mind of the team, I think it is not good for the team to go for a long-term journey.
So now I'm going to take a second to address the criticisms. It was boring football. Was it boring fighting for playoffs all season and watching Jaden Pillagine tear apart her teams practically on his own sometimes, especially when Blapp was injured? Rosenior spent all the money. Our most expensive money transfer was Jaden Pillagine, and yet we had this strange buyback clause with Aston Villa. If any club came in for Pillagine, Villa had first rights to sign Pillagine for approximately 30% cheaper. So our main money signing, quite frankly, was always going to return to his parent club at a profit to Hull City. Claims that we had a super squad. Let's go through every player individually and work it out. And of course, these are these players at this specific point in time. None of the goalkeepers at that time qualify as super keepers. Louis Coyle, Sean McLaughlin, Cyrus Christie, Matty Jacob, James Fairlong, even Ryan Giles at that time would not make it into a super championship team. Hasseri, a player of great pedigree and experience, but he was older. Now his passing range was excellent. The other parts of his game were not quite at that point, say his passing was, but for argument's sake, I will give you Hasseri, Regan Slater, Greg Doherty, Homer, Traore, no, Connolly, Sharp, Surrey, Ohio, no. So let's count them up. There is Greaves, Jones, Tufan, Morton, Carvalho. That makes up 5 or 6. A Philogene, and I'll put Tilap in there, even though I'd argue Rosenior pulled the best out of Tilap, because last season he couldn't even string together 4 goals at 2 clubs, and I mean that as no disrespect to Delap as a player. I really liked him, and I still like him despite him being quite injury prone. So that's 7 or 8 players out of a 20 odd man squad, and we call that a super team. Opinions are opinions, and I will always respect another person's opinion, but let's not try to pass either off as pure fact, okay? Because some of the players I haven't listed are grafters, and you need those in the championship, of course. At the same time, would any top 6 club who fully realised they're aiming for top 6 sign any of those other players I haven't mentioned at that time? I genuinely believe your answer is no. But that's enough for that. Now we'll summarise what happened when Liam Rosenior left. He was sacked. Tim Volta was brought in from Hamburg. He was sacked in half a season because we were in the relegation zones. To be fair, he wasn't properly backed in summer, leading us to sign the Reading coach at that time, Ruben Sayers, who had Reading in the playoffs despite a transfer embargo. He was signed by Sheffield United the season after, for his work at Hull City. Now you'd think, well, he must have done quite well. Hull City must have finished alright. You're going to see that in a second. We only survived on points difference, and this is what I was referring to earlier when I said it worked out overall with Jakurovic. You know, we stayed in the league, we kept ourselves sustainable after Rosenior. Eventually Akun got what he wanted, a more attacking style of football, and we're doing very well this season, even under a transfer embargo, but it was a risk. And in conclusion, look, I'm not here to talk badly of anyone, but our owner at Hull City is a risk taker. We've had 6 different coaches and we haven't even finished our 3rd season yet. And my overall point to talking about this is it's not Rosenior's fault. He wasn't given the time to build the process he wanted to build at Hull City, and his next job shows other clubs saw the potential in Liam Rosenior, leading us on to Strasbourg FC. I think it's worth prefacing this with talking about the Blueco acquisition of Strasbourg. Now, Blueco is the same people that took over Chelsea after Roman Abramovich, and so basically Strasbourg had a lot more access to finances, and it was also a very good tester for Rosenior going into the Chelsea job. This is because he had a lot of access to funds, but also the transfer strategy was signing very young players, under 23s, and building them up to the point where Rosenior, in his time at Strasbourg, despite finishing 7th, only ever signed 3 players over that age, including Ben Chilwell, for example. There was a lot of pressure with the amount of money Rosenior was given from Strasbourg to make transfers. But if you've been paying attention, this is actually what Rosenior's really good at, which is getting the best out of the signings and players he has. And I think this is what's really overlooked about Rosenior, because I feel like a lot of people in the English game who support the English teams haven't really looked at the job in detail that he was doing over at Strasbourg. And here is the list of summer signings. There's so many, I even struggled to fit them into one page. And that goes to show Strasbourg had, or Blueco even had, similar ideas about what they were doing for Chelsea in terms of the volume of signings they were making. Strasbourg signed a lot of players, and so although Rosenior got a lot of backing and a lot of fresh young talent to work with, what I would say is it wasn't exactly easy to make it all work as soon as he arrived. Those were the only players over 23 signed, along with Chelsea loanies he had access to. The key wins showing how well Rosenior did come against Paris Saint-Germain, which ended up 2-1, and an impressive 4-2 victory over Olympique Lyon, where he fielded the youngest recorded team that season out of any of Europe's other leagues, recording an average age of 21 and a half years old.
In first half stoppage time, Habib Diarra pass to Felix Le Marachal, who swept the ball home to double Strasbourg's lead.
And here's how Rosenior did compared to Strasbourg's past managers. He cleared Patrick Vieira's record at Strasbourg, which I think it's also important to notate that Vieira was there under Bluco, and he ended up leaving by mutual consent. Obviously, he came from Crystal Palace, where he did a decent job. And here are some insane stats from his time at Strasbourg too. Under 21 players minutes, over 15,000 minutes, which is unheard of in a top 5-6 league, as France is known as. A youngest lineup against Nice in 2025. Aside from this, he also boosted the value of the players he signed overall massively. He got a lot of money to spend in those transfers, don't get me wrong, but he also made it worth it for Strasbourg by how he inflated their values, by how he got them all playing at the time. And given this sort of backing, his record is very impressive, and this is why I believe from day one he was actually a very good appointment for Chelsea. But again, I do think this time at Strasbourg was overlooked by especially Chelsea fans and a lot of neutral pundits, because they hadn't been keeping an eye on Rosenior and Strasbourg. In fact, I believe there was less backlash for appointing Frank Lampard, who had previously only to that job had experience in the Championship with Derby County, as well as Strasbourg recouping nearly half of their money by selling only a couple of players, which leads us on to current day. Liam Rosenior is obviously currently the manager of Chelsea. Now, what we're going to talk about is the reaction to him being appointed. We're going to cover the social media side and how it's been perceived, etc. And we're also going to use the Carabao Cup as case studies as to why I really do believe with time, which Rosenior hopefully will get at a club like Chelsea, but it's never a guarantee. He will make this Chelsea side and this kind of crazy $2 billion spend, which was a clause after the Abramovich contract. He will make it work if he is given the chance, the freedom, and quite frankly, their own fan support.
But there are certain moments in your life that you have a decision to make that you cannot say no to. This, for me, is a club that I will love for the rest of my life, that I will want to do well for the rest of my life. But this opportunity for me is something that I cannot turn down at this moment in my life.
It is arguably the most underwhelming signing that I've seen for Chelsea in terms of management in my lifetime. Every single manager that we brought in under Abramovich, you said, you know what, this guy's had a history.
And this is the type of reception that Rosenior was initially met with. However, I don't even think it's that true when you have a look at the list of previous Chelsea managers, especially post Abramovich. Rosenior's had more club experience than Frank Lampard. When he was appointed, he only managed Derby County, and I'd even argue Rosenior has more experience at a club or a club structure like Chelsea than Graham Potter, because Brighton is a far cry from the current Chelsea structure. Brighton are a compact squad. They scout good unknown talent, they buy cheap, they sell high. That is not the current Chelsea system, which has about 3 squads you could probably see competing in the Premier League. On top of this, I would also argue that the age of big clubs just signing the biggest name manager available at the time is over. look at United with Ten Hag, Amorim and Carrick. Look at Arsenal giving a process to Mikel Arteta, his literal first head coach job. And even with Chelsea in recent times, it never worked out with Pochettino. And overall, I think there was a sense of ignorance when Rosenior arrived to the type of coach he is. And as I've said, to the monumental and record work he was doing over at Strasbourg under the same management, which was Blueco. So now that's covered, let's talk about the social media reception to Liam Rosenior.
I'm quite enjoying some of his slightly David Brent moments. Did you see the stuff about managing? Manage is man and age, and we are aging men.
Since we are looking at funny clips, here's one of my favourite of Gary Lineker's. I'd even call it quite Jason Puncheon-esque.
All of a sudden we've got things like Waddle hitting long balls out of his own defence, where you'd be far happier seeing Waddle, as he did when I think he should have had a penalty, taking men on in the top half of the field, and Barnes doing that. Gascoigne playing in the top half.
No, I don't see it, other than when my kids, who are now their generation, they're all over it, and when they see funny pictures of Will from the In-Betweeners or David Brent, they send it to me and laugh at me, so I'm aware.
They're sending you TikToks of yourself?
Yeah, they love it.
This sense, I do feel quite bad for Rosenior. Say 10 years ago, you would never see a reaction of this kind on social media towards her manager. I think what sort of shifted it towards this sort of state, a kind of the Amazon documentaries. The best example I can think of is Spurs All or Nothing under Jose Mourinho. And in that sense, Rosenior takes it well in this interview, but at the same time, it must be quite hard because he's said a couple of things and it's spread like wildfire over social media. And I don't know, it is unfair because I'll pose this question to everyone. Have you not ever had a moment where you've worded something wrong, or it's spread like wildfire and been laughed at? Now imagine that times 100, and you are a professional manager. I just think it's massively blown out of proportion, and specifically for a Chelsea manager, I've never seen anything like it. Not even with Arteta, even though he does get that criticism a bit sometimes. But with Rosenior, I do think it's unfair.
Wait off it, Sanchez. Perfectly into the path of Gyökeres, who will take that view. And Pedro's managed to free himself.
Talking about Chelsea's Carabao Cup performances against Arsenal, you can say he got the second leg wrong, okay, but in that first leg, I don't believe it's actually Rosenior's fault or really the goalkeeper's, and here's why. Robert Sanchez is not used to being a ball playing goalkeeper, which is what Rosenior's style requires. So on both ends, this will take time to implement, and in terms of that, how Pedro crossed, no one was on the end of. In time, the players who are supposed to be set up to receive that will become more aware of that. those type of situations. We've seen it most recently in Chelsea's last game with Cole Palmer, even though he missed it. The chance creation was subliminal, and that is exactly the point I'm trying to make here. And that's even disregarding the fact he's had to play 2 legs against a coach who's had a 3 or 4 year process just to implement everything he wants to implement, and he's also became more closed off and sort of pragmatic, I would say, in that sense, in terms of Arteta. So what I would say is those sort of errors that were shown in the Carabao Cup, they will become a lot less frequent and maybe even eradicated given a bit of time. Thank you for watching. I hope you have enjoyed. If you have, a like, a subscribe, etc. helps me push my channel out. This video took me quite a long time to put together in terms of fact checking, in terms of audio editing and chopping, things like that, and general research on Strasbourg and Derby, for example. Double checking, triple checking. I hadn't got anything wrong. If you have any opinions, I'd be interested to hear them in the comments. If you've watched all of the video, thank you, I appreciate it. More videos coming soon. Until next time, take care. Bye for now.